Breaking: judges just hit Trump with a financial bombshell. See how much he could lose. A seismic ruling in a New York City courthouse has reverberated far beyond the marble walls of justice, striking at the very foundation of a former president's financial and political identity. In a staggering legal and financial one-two punch, two separate judicial rulings within hours of each other have not only affirmed massive civil liabilities against Donald J. Trump, but have also dramatically accelerated the timeline for him to produce nearly $500 million in cash or bonds. This is no longer merely a legal battle. It is a liquidity crisis of historic proportions for a man who built a global brand on the image of limitless wealth and deal-making prowess. The numbers are almost incomprehensible in their scale, with accrued interest ticking upwards by over $100,000 daily. The total judgment now exceeds $454 million. The presiding judge, Arthur Engoron, in a terse, unsparing order, has formally denied requests for a delay and given Trump a strict 30-day window to secure the funds, a timeline legal experts describe as brutally short for a sum of this magnitude. This ruling transforms abstract legal jeopardy into an immediate, tangible threat to the Trump Organization's solvency, forcing a fire sale of iconic assets or a humbling search for financial rescue from allies, a search that may already be proving desperate and fraught. The origins of this financial avalanche lie not in the political arenas of Washington, but in the meticulous, years-long investigation by New York Attorney General Letitia James. Her office pursued a singular thesis that Donald Trump and his company systematically and fraudulently inflated the value of assets to secure favorable loans and insurance terms. The case, initially dismissed by Trump and his team as a partisan witch hunt, was built on a mountain of documentary evidence, deals, statements of financial condition, and internal communications that painted a detailed picture of valuation practices that Justice Engoron would later label a fantasy world. The legal theory pursued by the Attorney General did not require proving that banks lost money. Instead, it focused on the intent to deceive, using New York's powerful Executive Law 6312, a statute designed to combat persistent fraud in business dealings. This broad legal net proved devastatingly effective. The state argued successfully that the Trump Organization's conduct was not mere puffery or legitimate disagreement over property values, but a repeated and calculated pattern of misrepresentation that became standard operating procedure, corrupting the very foundation of honest commerce in the state. Judge Engoron's initial summary judgment, issued before the trial even began, set the catastrophic tone. He found the defendants liable for fraud, ordering the dissolution of Trump's New York corporate certificates, a corporate death penalty that threatened to dismantle his business empire in its home state. While an appeals court later stayed that specific remedy, it left the core finding of liability intact, setting the stage for a trial solely to determine the scope of penalties and ill-gotten gains. From that moment, the question was never about guilt, but about the financial magnitude of the consequences. The trial itself was a surreal spectacle, juxtaposing dry testimony from loan officers and accountants with Trump's defiant courtroom theatrics. The former president used the defendant's table as a political podium, facing fines for violating a gag order aimed at protecting court staff. Throughout, his legal team maintained that the bank's sophisticated institutions like Deutsche Bank were happy customers who performed their own due diligence and profited handsomely from their dealings with Trump. This no-harm, no-foul defense was systematically dismantled by the state's evidence, which showed the inflated valuations were directly tied to specific financial benefits. In a scathing 92-page post-trial ruling, Justice Engoron methodically dismantled Trump's defense and imposed the staggering penalty. He characterized the defendant's refusal to admit error as a complete lack of contrition and remorse that bordered on pathological, a factor that influenced the severity of the sanctions. The judgment includes not only the disgorgement of ill-gotten gains estimated at over $350 million, but also punitive interest mandated by New York statute, calculated from the dates of the original fraudulent transactions, not from the date of the judgment, leading to the explosive growth of the total figure. Simultaneously, in a related but separate defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll, a federal judge finalized an $83.3 million judgment against Trump, denying his request for a new trial or to reduce the bond. This dual judicial hardening happening concurrently, signals a judicial system losing patience with delay tactics and appeals to exceptional treatment. The message from the bench is unequivocal. The judgments are real, they are enforceable, and the time for stalling is over. For Trump's financial team, it represents a nightmare scenario of competing, immediate cash demands exceeding $500 million. The immediate practical problem is the mechanism of appeal itself. To appeal the New York fraud judgment, Trump must post a bond for the full amount, plus interest, which serves as a guarantee that the state can collect if he loses. Bonding companies, known as sureties, do not simply accept property as collateral. They require cash or cash equivalents like stocks or bonds to backstop the risk. For a bond approaching $500 million, sureties would likely demand collateral worth 120% of the judgment, over $550 million in liquid assets. This requirement exposes a central mystery of the Trump empire, whether such deep liquidity exists. Financial forensics experts examining Trump's available asset portfolio see a stark disconnect between perceived wealth and liquid wealth. His most valuable assets, Trump Tower, 40 Wall Street, Doral Golf Resort, Mar-a-Lago, are heavily mortgaged, tied up in complex ownership structures or both. Selling them under duress in a 30-day time frame would mean accepting fire sale prices, potentially at a fraction of their claimed values. Furthermore, any attempt to move large assets quickly would alert the market to his distress, driving prices down further and potentially triggering loan covenants with other lenders, creating a cascading financial crisis. The personal and corporate reputational damage in the financial world is already proving perhaps as debilitating as the judgment itself. Major Wall Street banks and regulated domestic lenders severed ties with Trump years ago. His longtime accounting firm, Mazars USA, abandoned him and disavowed a decade of financial statements. Now the sureties that could provide the appeal bond are highly regulated, risk-averse institutions. Insiders in the surety industry privately express deep reluctance, citing the unique combination of enormous size, the applicant's volatile reputation, and the underlying finding of fraud as making the transaction radioactive from a risk and compliance perspective. This has ignited a frantic search for alternatives, with Trump's lawyers openly stating he may need to approach private wealthy individuals or foreign entities. Such a move would carry astronomical political risk. Accepting a financial lifeline from a foreign national or entity could raise severe legal questions under election laws and constitutional emoluments clauses, not to mention the political attack ads it would fuel indefinitely. Domestically, the pool of individuals with both the capacity and willingness to risk nearly $500 million on a single, highly controversial person is vanishingly small, pointing towards a profound isolation at the moment of greatest financial need. The legal avenues for relief are narrowing rapidly. Appeals to New York's Appellate Division, First Department, are underway, but legal scholars note that overturning a judge's factual findings, especially ones as meticulously documented as Engoron's, is a steep uphill climb. The appeals court may tinker with the fine amount or the mechanics of the bond, but is unlikely to throw out the judgment entirely. The U.S. Supreme Court, meanwhile, has no clear jurisdictional hook to intervene in a state civil fraud matter at this stage, despite Trump's inevitable attempts to frame it as a federal constitutional issue. The human dimension within the Trump Organization is one of siege and uncertainty. Senior executives, also found liable for millions in penalties, face personal financial ruin. Loyal employees wonder about the viability of their jobs as the corporate entity faces potential asset seizures by the state. The ruling grants the Attorney General sweeping oversight, including the installation of an independent monitor and a director of compliance with veto power over major transactions for years to come. This effectively ends the Trump family's unilateral control over their flagship business, imposing a form of corporate probation with teeth. Politically, the ruling creates a paradox. For Trump's base, the judgment is framed as the ultimate evidence of a weaponized justice system, a witch hunt of epic scale designed to prevent his return to the White House. This narrative galvanizes his core supporters, for whom financial penalties levied by a New York Democratic official are a badge of honor. Yet for the independent and suburban voters who decided the 2020 election, the imagery is starkly different. A businessman found by a court to be a fraud, facing consequences so severe they threaten the survival of his life's work. Internationally, the spectacle is being watched with a mixture of shock and schadenfreude. In global financial capitals like London, Zurich, and Dubai, where Trump once courted investment, the ruling is a case study in the perils of opaque valuation and legal hubris. It severely damages any remaining credibility for future international deals. Adversarial states, meanwhile, are mining the court documents for propaganda, showcasing the judgment as proof of American corruption and decline, even as they likely study the asset portfolio for points of financial vulnerability to exploit. Economists point to a broader chilling effect on commercial real estate, a sector already under stress. The case establishes a powerful precedent for aggressive prosecution of valuation fraud, potentially opening the floodgates for litigation against other developers. Banks will inevitably tighten lending standards for high-profile, personality-driven entities, demanding more third-party appraisals and transparency. The Trump case, in this sense, may become a landmark that reshapes industry practices, forcing a long-overdue reckoning with the art of property valuation. Looking ahead, several scenarios are now in play. The first is a last-minute high-cost deal with a specialty financier or consortium, likely involving exorbitant fees and a lien on crown jewel assets, allowing Trump to post the bond and continue the appeal. The second is partial bond posting, should the appeals court grant a reduction, a possibility but not a guarantee. The third and most damaging is failure to secure the bond, leading the New York Attorney General to begin the process of seizing assets. This could involve placing liens on properties and ultimately moving for sheriff sales, a process as humiliating as it is financially destructive. The long-term consequences for the Trump brand are likely irreversible. The initials Trump once connoted luxury, success, and sheer force of will. They now, in the eyes of the formal judicial record, are associated with fraudulent inflation and sanctioned business practices. Future licensing deals, the lifeblood of brand monetization, will be non-existent. The commercial empire is effectively frozen, operating under court supervision, its value gutted, not by market forces, but by legal findings. The entity is in maintenance mode, not growth mode, with its future contingent on the outcome of appeals and the financial stamina of its owner. For the American political system, the case sets a profound precedent that immense political power and a cult of personality are not shields against the granular, slow-moving wheels of civil justice. It tests the principle that no one is above the law in the commercial sphere, even as other legal battles test it in the criminal and constitutional realms. The simultaneous advancement of these cases creates a multidimensional threat to Trump that political campaigning alone cannot neutralize, introducing a variable of financial exhaustion never before seen in a modern presidential campaign. As the 30-day clock ticks down, the pressure will reach an almost unbearable intensity. Every statement from Trump, every legal filing, every financial disclosure will be scrutinized for signs of cracking foundations. The possibility of the state of New York moving to seize 40 Wall Street or Trump Tower, while logistically complex, is now a non-zero probability, a scene once unimaginable in American life. It represents not just the potential fall of a man, but the dramatic, enforced unraveling of a carefully constructed myth. In the end, this financial bombshell is about more than money. It is about accountability, velocity, and the collision of two worlds, the brash, rule-bending universe of New York real estate and the precise, evidence-driven realm of the law. The judges have spoken, not with political rhetoric, but with the cold, hard language of arithmetic and statute. They have presented a bill, one that comes due not in political currency, but in the very cash that fuels an empire. The coming weeks will reveal whether the myth can pay its debts, or whether the towering persona built on gold lettering will finally meet a force it cannot intimidate, cannot delay, and cannot bankrupt, the final enforceable judgment of the state. This response is AI-generated, for reference only. Also due for this, what if Iran's agreement to nuclear talks with Trump changes the world order overnight? What if Iran's agreement to nuclear talks with Trump changes the world order overnight? The geopolitical landscape, long defined by rigid fault lines and frozen animosities, now stands at the precipice of a transformation. So sudden it has left capitals from Washington to Beijing reeling in disbelief. In a stunning diplomatic gambit, conveyed through back channels of Swiss intermediaries and encrypted messages. The Islamic Republic of Iran has communicated its unconditional readiness to engage in direct high-stakes nuclear negotiations with the administration of former President Donald J. Trump. This is not a proposal for renewed talks within the old framework, but a demand for an immediate summit, with the stated aim of achieving a comprehensive and final settlement within a single presidential term. The world, conditioned to decades of incrementalism and stalemate, has been presented with an overnight test of its capacity for strategic whiplash. The mechanics of this overture are as consequential as its substance. According to senior officials in 3 European governments briefed on the communication, Iran's proposal bypasses the European Union, snubs the current US administration, and is explicitly addressed to the victor of the impending American election, framing Trump not as a past president, but as a president in waiting. This audacious move fundamentally alters the diplomatic chessboard, treating the United States' domestic electoral cycle as a mere intermission in global affairs, and betting the stability of the Middle East on the return of a singular, unpredictable figure. It is, in the words of a stunned NATO ambassador, an act of diplomatic insurgency that targets the very concept of institutional continuity. To grasp the magnitude of this rupture, one must revisit the smouldering wreckage of the last major agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA). Negotiated under President Obama in 2015, the deal imposed strict limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Its unilateral dismantling by President Trump in 2018, reimposing what Tehran termed economic terrorism, became the defining trauma of Iran's modern foreign policy. The subsequent maximum pressure campaign brought the Iranian economy to its knees, but also spurred a dramatic acceleration of nuclear advancement, with Tehran enriching uranium to near weapons-grade levels and rendering the old deal's restrictions obsolete. The landscape for any new talks is thus fundamentally different and far more dangerous. Iran's calculus for this dramatic pivot, analysts suggest, is born of utter exhaustion and ruthless opportunism. The nation is buckling under the weight of hyperinflation, youth disillusionment, and a legitimacy crisis for its theocratic rulers. Simultaneously, its regional axis of resistance is more empowered than ever, projecting influence from Gaza to the Red Sea. This paradoxical position, domestic vulnerability, paired with geopolitical strength, has created a unique window. The leadership in Tehran, according to think tank assessments, has concluded that a deal with a transactional, deal-oriented Trump offers a faster path to sanctions dismantlement than endless cycles of talks with an administration bound by congressional opposition and European caution. The immediate reaction within the United States has been a political earthquake, fracturing traditional alliances and orthodoxies. The current administration has been blindsided, issuing statements that emphasize the constitutional reality that only the sitting president can conduct foreign policy. Yet the power of the proposal lies in its psychological force. It has already begun to erode the authority of the incumbent, creating a surreal shadow diplomacy. Trump's own response, delivered via social media, was characteristically monumental and vague. Iran knows I get things done. A great deal for everyone is possible. 24 hours. This has instantly elevated the prospect from a speculative rumor to the central destabilizing issue of the American election campaign. In the Middle East, the announcement has triggered a realignment so rapid it resembles the scattering of iron filings near a new magnet. Israel's Security Cabinet held an emergency marathon session described by one participant as the most tense in decades. The foundational Israeli security doctrine that Iran is an existential threat to be countered through coercion, and if necessary, military force is suddenly confronted with the prospect of its primary ally negotiating a grand bargain without its consent. For Saudi Arabia and the Gulf monarchies, long covertly aligned with Israel against Iran, the proposal introduces a profound dilemma. Do they trust a Trump-negotiated deal to permanently contain Tehran, or do they see this as the prelude to an American withdrawal that leaves them exposed to a legitimized, sanctions-free Iranian rival? The ripple effects extend to the great power competition that defines this century. In Moscow and Beijing, the initial reaction was one of stunned silence, followed by urgent consultations. Russia, a key ally and military partner to Iran, faces the potential loss of a primary lever for undermining Western unity in the Middle East. China, Iran's top oil customer and strategic partner under its Belt and Road Initiative, must recalculate its energy security and regional influence strategy overnight. A US-Iran détente brokered unilaterally by Trump would represent the most significant diminution of Chinese and Russian influence in the region in a generation, upending their carefully laid plans for a multipolar world order, not dictated by Washington. The technical and verification challenges of such an overnight deal are Herculean. Iran's nuclear program is more advanced, dispersed and opaque than it was in 2015. Any agreement would require a new intrusive inspection regime far beyond the JCPOA's parameters, likely demanding access to military sites Iranian leaders have sworn are off-limits. Furthermore, the scope of the talks as framed by Iran includes its ballistic missile program and regional proxy network, issues explicitly excluded from the previous deal. Squaring this circle in a single negotiating sprint would require concessions of a scale that could destabilize the regimes in both Tehran and Washington, each facing ferocious domestic opposition from hardliners, for whom compromise is treason. European powers find themselves in a peculiar state of obsolescence. For years, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, the E3 struggled to keep the JCPOA alive as honest brokers and mediators. Iran's direct appeal to Trump renders them spectators. It is a brutal lesson in realpolitik. Iran has judged that Europe possesses economic weight but not decisive power. The EU's foreign policy apparatus, built on patient consensus and rule-based multilateralism, is ill-equipped for a disruptive, bilateral and personality-driven negotiation of this magnitude. This move effectively sidelines the European project as a major actor in one of the world's most volatile regions, a humiliation with lasting consequences for its global ambitions. The economic implications are already flashing across trading terminals worldwide. Global oil markets anticipate the potential swift return of over 1 million barrels per day of Iranian crude, which could crash prices and reshape OPEC plus dynamics overnight. This would deliver an economic shock to petrostates like Russia and Saudi Arabia, while acting as a stimulus for oil-importing economies. Simultaneously, multinational corporations, from aerospace to automotive, are dusting off long-dormant market entry plans for a post-sanctions Iran. A nation of 85 million consumers, the global financial system is bracing for the logistical chaos of unwinding a labyrinthine sanctions architecture that took a decade to build. For the global non-proliferation regime, this moment is existentially critical. A hastily negotiated deal that fails to establish a durable, verifiable cap on Iran's nuclear ambitions could trigger a cascade of proliferation across the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has repeatedly stated it will seek nuclear weapons if Iran obtains them. Egypt and Turkey could follow. Conversely, a successful deal that rolls back Iran's program could in theory reinforce the norms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the precedent it sets, that advanced nuclear capability is a bargaining chip to be leveraged for a grand geopolitical settlement, sends a dangerous signal to other threshold states in Asia and beyond, suggesting that breakout capacity is the surest path to negotiating with great powers. The human dimension inside Iran is one of agonized hope and deep suspicion. For a populace crushed by economic isolation, the prospect of open commerce, travel and connection is intoxicating. Yet memories are long. Many recall that the last relief was fleeting, and they distrust a process that could empower a revolutionary guard corps, flush with sanctions-free revenue, to further suppress dissent. The protest slogan, "No to Gaza, no to Lebanon, I sacrifice my life for Iran," echoes in this context, a public warning to its own government not to trade away regional proxies for a deal that fails to improve daily lives. The regime is attempting to walk a razor's edge between external engagement and internal control. As analysts scramble to model scenarios, several stark possibilities emerge. The first is a genuine rapid negotiation, resulting in a Trump-Iran-New York Accord, a transformative but deeply flawed pact that exchanges sanctions lift for a nuclear freeze and vague regional promises, effectively reshuffling the Middle East order and isolating Israel. The second is a catastrophic collapse of talks, with a humiliated and cornered Iran deciding to sprint for a nuclear weapon, triggering a preemptive military strike by Israel, with incalculable consequences. The third, and perhaps most destabilizing, is a prolonged state of diplomatic purgatory, where the expectation of a deal paralyzes all other policy, emboldens Iranian aggression, and locks the region in a dangerous holding pattern awaiting an American election result. The legacy of such a world-altering event would be the final erosion of trust in the predictability of international affairs. It validates a model of diplomacy centered on charismatic strongmen and bypasses institutions painstakingly built since World War II. It tells allies that their interests are contingent on American domestic politics, and tells adversaries that the path to success is to wait for a preferable US president. The very fabric of alliance management, treaty compliance, and diplomatic protocol is torn, replaced by a transactional, personalized, and volatile system where long-term strategy is impossible. In the end, Iran's proposal is more than an offer to talk. It is a mirror held up to a fractured world. It reflects the diminishing power of norms and the rise of audacious, high-risk gambits. It highlights the vulnerability of the international system to the whims of domestic populist politics. As the world holds its breath, the clock started by this unexpected message ticks down, not just toward a potential negotiation, but toward a fundamental test. Can the existing world order adapt to and absorb such a shock, or does this single stunning diplomatic cable mark the instant the old system blinked and a new, far more unpredictable one began? The coming dawn may reveal that the world order did not change overnight in a negotiation, but in the moment everyone was forced to consider that it could.